So in this video, we're going to talk about Henrik Ibsen's play, An Enemy of the People. Before I get started, I do have a kitty cat in my laundry basket, so you may see him moving around during the video. But An Enemy of the People is an interesting play, in part because this was written after Ghosts, Ibsen's play, which drew a significant public outcry because, I mean, if you watched my video on Ghosts, you'll know this already, but it drew a significant public outcry because of its focus on things like venereal disease, sexual openness, the possibility of an incestuous relationship, and assisted suicide, things like this. An Enemy of the People is Ibsen's response to the substantial negative criticism that was directed at him for writing this play. Basically, people were like, nope, this is terrible. And Ibsen was like, you're a bunch of small-minded idiots, and I hate you. And that's what An Enemy of the People is about. So basically, this play starts off, the premise is that we follow Dr. Stockman, who is the chief medical officer of a baths in a town in western Norway. It's supposed to be a sort of health spa that this town has constructed that's going to bring in a ton of money. It's going to buoy the economic life of the community, etc., etc. Dr. Stockman, chief medical officer, gung-ho, yeah, I want to save the town, I love this town, I'm a patriot, etc., etc. What he discovers, however, is that the water is poisoned. There are some factories upstream, including the factory of his father-in-law, as we come to learn. And the chemicals from those factories, the waste from those factories, has flowed downstream through the pipes that the Baths Committee decided to place at a lower level underground than Dr. Stockman wanted them. He wanted them higher up. They put them lower down. And because they were put lower down, it's carried this bacteria and these toxins down so that instead of being a health spa, it's going to be a poison spa, which of course is less likely to buoy the economic life of the community, because typically sick people are not all that keen on going somewhere and getting sicker. So, in the first act of the play, we learn about these baths, we learn about Dr. Stockman's role. I'll say Dr. Stockman because there's also Peter Stockman, his brother, who's the mayor. And we learn that Dr. Stockman has had this suspicion for a while, and he's sent samples of the water off to a lab to be tested, and he's just received a letter that confirmed his hypothesis. So that's what we get in the first act. One of the interesting things, because Ibsen loves foreshadowing, so Peter Stockman, the mayor, has come, and he's not his brother's biggest fan, because his brother tends to be a bit sort of curmudgeonly, and high-strung is maybe not the right word, but he tends to, like, he will get his teeth into an idea, and he does not let it go. So Peter Stockman is visiting Dr. Stockman's home. Hofstad is there. Hofstad is the editor of the People's Messenger, a liberal paper. And then, because Peter Stockman is the mayor, and therefore an authority figure, and Hofstad is a sort of liberal, not necessarily anarchist, but he's opposed to the powers that be. They're not on the greatest terms. But Peter Stockman does say, taking one thing with another, there's an excellent spirit of toleration in the town, an admirable municipal spirit. And it all springs from the fact of our having a great common interest to unite us, an interest that is, in an equally high degree, the concern of every right-minded citizen. And Hofstad says the baths, yes. So we've got sort of double foreshadowing here. One is an ironic one, the admirable spirit of toleration, which will be tested quite severely in this play, and two is everybody's interests are united around the baths. Now, by the end of Act 1, so Peter Stockman is gone. Hofstede and some others are there, Dr. Stockman's family, etc., etc. Act 1 actually ends with him revealing his discovery to them and them being like, this is amazing that you found this in time. Billing, who also works for the People's Messenger, is like, upon my soul, Doctor, you are going to be the foremost man in the town. And basically, like, Act 1 ends with this positive momentum where Dr. Stockman is like, yes, I will present this evidence, and then people will be like, great, we'll fix the baths up, and then everything is going to be awesome. You've saved the town. We want to give you more money and a parade and all this stuff. Things start going downhill pretty quickly. In Act 2, Peter Stockman, because Dr. Stockman sends his report and the letter from the university chemist back to Peter Stockman to basically say, here's what we've got to do, we got to fix this. Peter comes by in Act 2 and is basically like, no. It's going to be super, super expensive, and I'm not really convinced this is true. And Dr. Stockman's like, but here's the evidence. All the evidence says that this is exactly true. And Peter Stockman's like, yeah, but, I'm not convinced. So he would be a vaccine skeptic. He would be an anti-masker in the context of 2022. 2020, 2021, 2022. This whole shit series of years. Peter comes down largely on the side of it would cost about £20,000, which in the 1880s is extremely expensive. It would cost a massive amount of money. We're not really convinced it's as big of a problem as you're convinced it is. Therefore, we're not going to do it. And if you don't shut up about all this, you'll lose your job at the baths, and will basically try and destroy your reputation and career. Hofstede, Billing, and Aslickson, who's the printer who prints the People's Messenger, and also leader of the Householders Association, sort of middle-class, petit bourgeois people. They all initially are behind Dr. Stockman. They're like, yes, we will put pressure on the authorities to make sure that this is done right, to make sure that the baths are safe, and all this stuff. In Act 3, Peter Stockman comes by the office of the People's Messenger, and he's basically like, hey, you know what? The rich people who backed up the baths are not going to pay for this. So if you want these changes done to the baths, you, the small, petit bourgeois people, will have to pay for it. And we will raise taxes to pay for it. It's going to take at least 2 years to fix all the things that Dr. Stockman says need to be fixed. That's going to be 2 years of you not making any money, etc., etc. And so Aslickson, as well as Hofstede and Billing, all sort of say, that sounds terrible. Yeah, it's possible the water's poisoned, but we no longer really believe it. And so this is sort of what happens throughout much of Acts 2 and 3 into Act 4, is the mayor and then the People's Messenger, the Householders Association, etc., etc., increasingly turn against Dr. Stockman. Now, the way that this all relates to the criticism of Ibsen for Ghosts is that Stockman's ultimate position, Dr. Stockman's ultimate position, ends up being that the majority is inherently wrong and the minority is inherently right. We get this really in Act 4 because there's a big meeting that Dr. Stockman calls. And basically he makes this extensive speech. Maybe the key passages of which are these two that I'm about to read you. When he says, Hofstede says the majority always has right on its side. And Billing says, and truth too, by God. And Dr. Stockman says, the majority never has right on its side. Never, I say. That is one of these social lies against which an independent, intelligent man must wage war. Who is it that constitute the majority of the population in a country? Is it the clever folk or the stupid? I don't imagine you will dispute the fact that at present the stupid people are an absolute overwhelming majority all the world over. But good Lord, you can never pretend that it is right that the stupid folk should govern the clever ones. Then there's uproar and cries. Oh yes, you can shout me down, I know, but you cannot answer me. The majority has might on its side, unfortunately, but right it has not. I am in the right, I and a few other scattered individuals. The minority is always in the right. There's renewed uproar. And Hofstede says, aha, so Dr. Stockman has become an aristocrat since the day before yesterday. And Dr. Stockman replies, I have already said that I don't intend to waste a word on the puny, narrow-chested, short-winded crew whom we are leaving astern. Pulsating life no longer concerns itself with them. I am thinking of the few, the scattered few among us who have absorbed new and vigorous truths. Such men stand as it were at the outposts, so far ahead that the compact majority has not yet been able to come up with them. And there they are fighting for truths that are too newly born into the world of consciousness to have any considerable number of people on their side yet. This is Nietzsche's Übermensch. So, Nietzsche and the theory of the Übermensch kind of have a bad reputation today, popularly because they were co-opted by the Nazis in ways that Nietzsche himself would have been abhorred, he would have been appalled, in ways that Nietzsche would have been appalled by, I think. The Übermensch in Nietzschean philosophy is essentially someone who embraces life, pursues truth, and gives no heed to social conventions when those conventions contradict the deep truths of life and existence. That's what Dr. Stockman is saying here. And so this is where it really gets relevant to the response the press had to Ghosts, because the press critiqued Ghosts for being too progressive, too open about these controversial social problems. And Ibsen basically said, I'm on the frontier of truth, and you're back there with 20-year-old truths that are rapidly decaying and being disproven. In this case, Dr. Stockman does happen to be right. The scientific evidence is on his side, as well as the experiential evidence of previous visitors to the baths having gotten sick. The idea that the minority is always right and the majority is always wrong, however, is an untenable philosophy in the face of reality. I mean, there are a lot of minorities that assert things that are demonstrably wrong. Flat earthers, for instance, are demonstrably wrong, and all attempts that they make to prove that the earth is flat are either unreliable or end up disproving their position because there is simply no basis for it. They are a minority. That doesn't make them right. Because this is part of the thing, is Dr. Stockman's philosophy doesn't allow for this kind of nuance. And this is actually one of the good things about Ibsen's play. Because actually, Arthur Miller in the 50s put on a version of Enemy of the People that was apparently much more simplistic. And it did away with a lot of the nuance of Ibsen's version. So basically the equation became Dr. Stockman is right, everybody else is wrong. Miller was a great playwright, but he did have a tendency toward didacticism in many cases. Ibsen's play, however, gives us a complex Dr. Stockman. So, yes, he is right about this particular issue. He also has a temper. He is intransigent in many ways. He is unwilling to compromise in any way. He believes he is absolutely right, and because he is absolutely right, everyone else must agree with him. No other considerations are relevant. Now, whether or not that's true is debatable. There's room for disagreement about this, but not for Dr. Stockman. There is no other consideration other than the absolute unquestionable truth which he is in possession of and no one else is. So he's not entirely an admirable character. He's also anti-democratic. He picks up from this idea that there are only a certain number of smart people in any given society, and it doesn't make any sense that stupid people should rule over them. He picks up on this and basically critiques the democratic and liberal principles of the People's Messenger, essentially picking up sort of the idea of Plato's philosopher kings from the Republic. The idea that smart people should be put in charge of society because they will do a better job than a democratic system could do. Now, we actually have substantial evidence that this is not the case. A book like James... I forget his last name. The book is entitled The Wisdom of Crowds, though, and he makes a particularly good case that democracies tend to make better decisions overall than systems in which even the smartest, most capable people are put in charge. The aggregate wisdom of a large group of people tend to make better decisions than individuals. This is incidentally one of the problems with representative democracy, where even though the aggregate may choose who represents them, those representatives then individually make decisions. But anyway, that's a different story. Dr. Stockman is anti-democratic in this sense. He believes that the smartest people should be put in charge of society because they will do things best. The problem is this is not borne out by experience. So that's that. And so I'm going to leave it there. That's where we come down on. Ibsen is using this play to make a sociocultural statement, namely that progressive ideas and new ideas, exploring the future, etc., is inherently a good thing, and those who do it are typically critiqued by the small-minded majority. But he also gives us this position from a complicated, fraught character.